Next on Two Counselors and a Mic.
I think education is kind of like a river, a big geyser flowing over a waterfall into a valley, right? Into a river. At the top are affluents, people who are in charge of the history, who's in charge of education, who's in charge of they're the knowledge keepers. And then they tell us what we want to know down here or what they feel like we should know. So we're getting the leftover education that they have. And it's not always the truth. It's not always the full story. It's what they feel like we need to know. And I feel like with after school, we can change that process. Instead of it flowing downhill, we can go uphill. You know, we can expand on what they're learning in the core day. We can dig a little deeper in the history books. We can go a little broader in science. And not only that, we're taking minority and people who may not have access to things up there with us. And so now we're broadening the river down here, and it's going to be like all the same at some point.
Thanks for landing on our podcast, where we use the power of our collective stories to make change in the world by expanding our understanding of who we are and how we learn.
We're a podcast dedicated to exploring the ever-changing topics related to education.
My name is Lisa Johnson Davis, and I am a counselor focusing on how we learn.
And my name is Gabriela Baeza Delgado. I am a counselor interested in maximizing our collective ideas to support all students. Welcome back to Two Counselors and a Mic. I'm Gabby.
And I'm Lisa. Thanks for landing on our second podcast. In this podcast, we will feature some great insights from Shameka Thompson, an educational practitioner coordinating the expanded learning program at High Tech High Chula Vista.
Good to see you again, Dr. D.
Thanks, Gabby, as always.
You know, so one of the things I've been thinking about, sometimes you will start a project or you end up in a job and you're not quite sure how you landed there or why a certain door was open versus another. And it's not until you're on the other side that you realize, oh, I see the bigger purpose that was behind the universe putting me at that particular place and time or in that role or in that job. So I was thinking about that, that sometimes when we're looking to find meaning or purpose in certain projects, it can come across or be discovered, I should say, through blood, sweat, and tears, right? That when something's been revealed to you, it doesn't usually happen until after the fact. And I was curious, is there a time in your life or an experience where you can say, wow, that experience, the purpose of that was not revealed to me until much later and has served an even greater role in my life?
Oh, absolutely. I think we talk about that all the time lately because of all of the changing pieces of education and even in the expanded learning field. And I like how you said about reveal because it's like you don't have the knowledge of all of these ripples and how they affect you. But at some point there becomes clarity in your life and you kind of take all those pieces and they form that complete puzzle. And so I see that happening now. I'm wondering for you, Gabby, when you think back on either like our recent escapades into reimagining learning or how we're trying to reinvent, or even like in your past or your background, like what is the time for you when you felt like all those pieces that you couldn't see individually reveal themselves to you in this almost like precision? We talk about precise moment of purpose.
Yeah, I would say for me, when I think back to one particular experience, it was a 3-year-long service learning project actually at Howard Pence Elementary. And it was all about service learning and integrating the philosophy and the mentality of no excuses university, which really follows the idea that if you expose kids at an early age to the idea of college, they're more likely to be intrigued by it and interested, and it makes it part of their vernacular to just talk about, I'm going to go to college and 2037 will be my graduating year or whatnot. But when I was in that very long 3 years of working with community partners and painting an entire school campus and working from scratch to develop murals with students after school and on the weekends, when I was in it, I honestly I hated painting and I didn't enjoy the mosaic murals that we were doing because it was a lot of intense work. And now when I look back, I've been asked before, what's the one project that you're the most proud of? It's that particular 3-year service learning project, because it changed the school. It didn't reveal itself until much later because it was through blood, sweat, and tears. We had teachers not happy that we were repainting the school. Mm-hmm. Again, a lot of hard work goes into doing massive size mosaic murals, and I didn't know that when I'm sitting there working with mud. And I was like, oh my God, this is so much more than I bargained for. And then when it was all said and done, I realized every single tear that I cried, complaint that I made about giving up weekends to be painting and working on these this transformation of the school site, I would do it again in a heartbeat, because honestly, it showed me that 3-year process, there was so much more than just the final product of a beautiful mural. It was for me that purpose of really being integrated into their projects, working with parents, working with kids side by side, with community partners. So for me, that purpose revealed itself of like, this is what I'm meant to be. I'm a key person in helping to change the school culture at this school. It was difficult in the beginning. We had to work through issues with contractors, things like that. Mm-hmm. But here we are 3 years later, and those murals are still standing. And that campus is one of the most beautiful campuses in the South Bay District because of those murals. And so it gave me that sense of purpose of, I'm trying to really build a sense of community. And that's what I didn't realize when I first started, that's what I was actually doing.
Yeah.
That purpose didn't reveal itself until much later.
I love that, because there's a couple things to unpack there. For me, immediately there's a sense that it's a collaborative, purpose, meaning making project. And then the other piece is it's an artifact. It's like an artifact of your purpose, or of a combined sense of purpose, almost like handprints on a cave wall. And
it's actually a really neat way to have you describe it, because you're right. It's a living artifact that maybe that's what makes it even sweeter, right? That I can go see it and it's there for people to enjoy.
Yeah. You hear parents, will say like, my children are representative of me. And really that could be part of the purposeful nature of parenthood. Or, an educator might say, like, when I see, my student go off and then they achieve and they, whatever that might look like, it's an artifact of potential, really. So one of the things I think we have to look at when we talk about reimagining learning and thinking differently about schooling is you contextualize that personally. So based on all these other variables that you had in your life and all of the experiences you had in your life, in that particular period of time, that was like a culmination, and you were able to understand it in a certain way based on all that has come before. But when you think about school right now, do we really provide those opportunities for students to be able to get all of these types of experiences that may not really look at face value as having any impact on them at all, their purpose or their potential or anything? They're just kind of living, but they are taking it in. And then at some point, probably when we don't even, have them in our classes or school as a whole, they'll reach back to those experiences. So it makes you wonder, what does school need to look like as we start thinking about the future? And how does meaning making, how does the ability to recontextualize, the ability to really showcase your artifacts of learning or purpose, how do those play a role in our new 21st century post-COVID school and learning environments?
Well, perhaps our wonderful guest, Shameka, will be able to enlighten us.
I think so. And now, our special guest. We are here with Shameka Thompson, who is the Site Coordinator, Athletic Director at High Tech High Chula Vista, the Crash Expanded Learning Program. Welcome, Shameka. It's so nice to see you.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Gabriella, for having me. Nice meeting you.
Yes, nice meeting you. I've heard a lot of good things about you and I'm curious to learn more about you. So welcome to the podcast. I'm excited. We always like to start our podcast, Shameka, with this big question in the beginning to help kind of frame the context for everyone. We're focusing on each other's journeys and our stories and how that connects to who we are and the work that we do. So that big question for us is really that why. And so if you think of Simon Sinek's work around what is the why that drives you to do what you do, could you share a little bit about what that is for you?
Why for me is very, very broad. I know when you're looking for the why, you're looking for something a little narrow and a little super focused. Because I didn't start my journey into education or even desiring to be in education, I'm still walking this wide road trying to narrow it. And so it's not specifically a why right now. It's a how do I do this and how do I get these things accomplished? I feel like I have so many things floating in my head and so many ideas. And I'm like, how do I get all this accomplished? I think it needs to at some point go into a why, but I'm not quite there yet. But if I had to say something about why is because I see, maybe because I'm outside of education, I came from outside of education, I see all these empty holes and I see all these things that everyone says is happening in education that is not. And I just want to fill them all, just want to kind of like, okay, do this, do that, do this, do that. This is not right. They're lying about this, So when you're looking at it from a step back and you're not like in the trenches as much as I would say maybe teachers or, a director or something like that is, you're kind of the bell sounder a lot.
So how did you land now that you are at High Tech High and working with kids? How did you land there? How did that come to be for you?
Oh my gosh, it came from a series of what I would have said of unfortunate events. Now I say they're fortunate events. I had my youngest son prematurely, so I had to quit a job. And I was out of work for 3 years. And at that time, my degree is in criminal justice. So I was looking to go work in the jails or the courts or anything like that. And as a single mother, I could not do that. I couldn't make it happen. When I was trying to go back into the workplace, the only job I could get was at Target as a cashier. And mind you, before that, I was like, I've managed, a Kmart before. So it was like a whole step back. And one day, this white-haired man came through my line. He had a T-shirt on that said High Tech High Athletics. And I was like, oh man, I miss athletics because I played basketball and I coached basketball prior. And so he was like, oh, I have a job opening. Our basketball coach just quit. He's like, oh, darn, no, it's the boys basketball team. And I was like, well, that's fine. I've never coached girls before. So it worked for me. And so that's how I ended up going, and I met Lisa when I met him again. And we were just talking. It literally was just me going there to talk about basketball. And I think it ended up being like a 3-hour conversation. We were just talking about life and this and that. And I ended up joining the Crash program that day. They offered me to not only be a coach, but to work within the after school program. And so that's where the journey began. Wow, this is a whole new world,
How did you even land to San Diego? Because you're not originally from here.
No.
How did that, like, maybe talk about a little bit about your journey, just where you were at, how you were growing up, like what was that experience for you being schooled?
I grew up in Riverside County. I went to school at Paris High. Very, how can I say, urban kind of setting, Title I school. Where I can say at that school, you can be either on the one side of the spectrum or the other. My sister was co-valedictorian. I never even seen a counselor. It depends. She had honors and all these classes. I never even knew that they existed. So it's kind of like you have to be a certain place at the school to know about any anything to better. And not to say that I was just the best student as far as my interest in school at the time. However, I was pretty much, I couldn't go to school for a week. I didn't go to school for a week and I can come back and ace a test. So it's not like I didn't have the brains. I just didn't have the interest. My senior year, it was a after school program, actually. A guy, he would come to campus and he would talk about college and he would talk about things. And at this time, my sister's at UCLA, but still it was a disconnect because it's like she was the first generation college student. She went away to college and we didn't have a car or a phone half the time. So it's kind of like she just disappeared. So it's not like she was bringing these experiences back home to tell us what college was like and what's going on and things like that. And didn't visit her a lot. So it was kind of like she just went off to the abyss somewhere. So we still wasn't exposed to that. But he came down, he started talking about college and it kind of became real to me. I'm like, wow, maybe I can play basketball and go to college. I thought my sister was an exception because she was just like brilliant. I didn't think it was just kind of like something I could do. So when I started thinking along those terms, I'm like, okay, well, maybe. So I got accepted into Cal State Northridge right out of high school. However, I found out I was pregnant. So with that, I ended up going to a JC and I played basketball there, made the team, ended up dropping out, going to a trade school, and ended up working for the County of Riverside, for the fire department. Dropped out of that and went back to school. And that's when my journey in education began. I said, I'm not dropping, I'm going to stay. So it took me 5 years to go. I did 2 years at a JC, then transferred over to Cal State San Bernardino. So I ended with my AA in social behavior science, and then I ended up with my BS in criminal justice. With that being said, I worked various jobs until I had my oldest son. So the funny part about this, and I don't know what people think about God or situations or being when things happen for a reason. That's why I said unfortunate events that I think are fortunate now, where with my son, I'm applying all over Riverside County, everywhere trying to find a job. I had a couple of friends that lived in San Diego. One worked for the Head Start program. And she was like, if you can just get out here, I could get him in the Head Start. And I'm like, I need a job out there. The only job I got called back was from a Target out here in Eastlake. Nowhere else I applied. That was the only place that called me back. So I ended up out here and I was sleeping on a friend's couch with my son. And that's how I met Alan. And this is where I am today.
Well, clearly the path to success is not linear, right? And your story is a testament to that for sure. You said something earlier that struck me. You said that you weren't interested. And I wonder, could you share a little bit more about what was behind the not being interested? Was it the environment at school? Was it teachers? Because we're oftentimes asked to come up with these strategies. How do we engage students who maybe are not showing interest? And so I'm just curious, from your perspective, what would have made you more interested or more likely to engage?
I think it was more of a confidence thing for me. It was things like confidence and disappointments. You had a school where I said it was like a total gap between what you had access to. I even think all the honor classes were on one side of the campus. So it wasn't like I was ASB. I did ASB my freshman year. I was homecoming princess. I was in the band. I played basketball. I was in Black Student Union. I was a secretary. So it wasn't like I wasn't active. I was engaged, but I never thought it would go anywhere. I never thought I didn't find any purpose in none of it. I didn't see anything. I just did it. So, and that's what everyone did. They kind of did it, and everybody was just kind of there. I don't feel like there was a relationship between any of that and me. I think that was what it was more for me, like the difference between now and then and how where I'm at now, the relationships I see formed. I don't ever remember nothing like that happening. So that was my disinterest. I wasn't interested because it was kind of a dead end for me.
Mm-hmm. The purpose piece is that's saying a lot, right? Because you clearly were engaged going through the motions maybe, but to hear you say that you lacked a sense of purpose or didn't see that purpose, that's pretty profound, I think. And so I'm curious, with that experience and journey you've led, how has that translated for you in the work that you've done with students?
I'm very intentional in everything that I do. I don't have a haphazard plan, or it's not something I just sit and like, oh, well, not to say there's times that I don't want to. I always think like, if I said something today, it may not resonate, but it may resonate when they're 25, when they actually need it, when they actually need that piece of advice. And this didn't come from a student. I mean, this didn't come from a teacher. This came from a student. I remember her name was Heidi. And you got to understand Heidi, she was like super, super, super white girl, blonde, bleached blonde hair, no tan. And she played basketball with it all, and we're all like black, Black, Hispanic. And she was just such like a joy. And I come from a church background, and she was really come from a church background also. And I remember her sitting there and telling me, she was like, Shameka, you know that you can walk in your beliefs and still be a teenager. You don't have to compromise. And I was just kind of like, I hear you, I hear you. That's something that stayed with me, something that I kind of taught my kids, and, it just never left. And that's the kind of thing that I think I want to be intentional about. Mm-hmm. I think if maybe that's my why, but I know that's my purpose. Mm-hmm. I just want them to have something. I don't want it just to be, I played this sport, or I was in this after school club. I want it to be a testimony to their life and not just something they did.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you've been able to pour a lot into their minds, their hearts. But I'm also curious, what have they taught you?
They taught me that they come with a glass half full. I was trying to pour everything in it. Like, not only when you're dealing with after school programming, extended learning, it's not always seen as maybe the most important thing that's going on. So you feel like you're advocating for things a lot, and you feel like you're screaming and no one's listening to you, and you're like, well, we need to improve on this. And these are low. And how do we engage these kids more? And everyone's like, yeah. We got core day, Not only does that have like stress and intention for you, now you're looking at the kids like, I'm not giving enough. So you're trying to make up for that with them and trying to think of all these creative things you can do for them. And then you realize that they already come with something too. And if you like kind of step back and listen, you don't have to work so hard with them. They'll show you what they want. They'll show you what they need. And then you can build from there, and you can build with them. It's not alone. It's not a thing that you have to do alone. I work alone, and I never had to. I could have always trusted them. I could have always looked to them. I could have always included them more. And that was just kind of like my first year alone. I'm just kind of like, oh my gosh, I gotta do so great. And I never did. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what they taught me. Even if I try to kick them out of my office, they won't leave.
You can't get rid of them.
No, I'm like, get out now. No, we have more ideas. No, get out now. I think that's what I could say, that I don't have to ride this journey alone. It was never meant for me to do this by myself. That's how it's set up.
How do you explain to somebody, a teacher in the core day, who doesn't necessarily have the experience of expanded learning? And we're talking a lot about like this idea of learning is expanding, that we really need to kind of think in different ways. And what you just said really, I feel like, captures that essence. But what would you say then to a teacher without that experience?
I think that when I have come across a teacher that has no experience with expanded learning, they tend to just think about it in terms of a club. Oh, kids want me to do this club because, and I'm okay with it. And then when you go in there, they're grading papers and the kids are in another corner. So then I start to see, okay, well, they think it's babysitting. That's That's their thing. Like, these kids need a safe space. And granted, they do. And I'm here to just make sure they're not jumping off walls. And that's it. And so I'm like, well, if by the end of this year, what would you want them to say they experienced? What would you want their experience to be? And I try to like wrap their head around experiences and memories and saying like, this couldn't have happened in the core day. It have only happened in this space. And it was a blessing that we could do it. So how can we make it memorable? How can we connect it to their life? How can we tie it back in somewhere? So I try to put it on a personal note with them, try to hit those notes with them.
What do you think education or expanded learning programs will look like for us in the next 10 years? So if you had a magic wand and you had things your way, what would that look like for us?
I think education in totality is going to look different. I think the lines between expanded learning and core day learning is going to be a little bit more blurred. I don't think it's going to be that fine line, that fine draw in the sand. Once you jump over here, it's 3:00 and teachers are out the door, and it's just, I think it has to be more collaborated, intentional. It's going to have to be, because if we don't have extended learning, what are they going to get cut off at 1? This is what we're doing, and we need to be able to supplement. We need to be able to support, and then we need to be able to provide experiences, and we need to work together and collaborate on doing it. And so they're going to need us. They're going to come looking. They're going to come running. Like, how can you help? I'm like, we've been here waiting, and I think it's going to be a beautiful thing once that happens. Once there isn't such a hard line drawn in the sand, especially with 9 through 12. You can say with the younger kids, they play more, but I think it's going to be a little bit more intentional, even for the K through 8. I think it's going to be even more intentional for them too. Even now, we're looking for ways to say like, okay, this is what we're doing. How can we support? And people are hearing that now, like, wait, we need support. How can we support? What's going on? What can we do?
What do these programs do that might not be something that happens in the core day? Or is there something?
Yes, I think these programs can start to reshape education as a whole. I think education is kind of like, I guess I have to be descriptive because no one can see me. But I think if you think about education, I think it's, if I was to visualize it, it's like a river, a big geyser flowing over a waterfall into a valley, right? Into a river. And at the top are affluent people, people who are in charge of the history, who's in charge of education, who's in charge of they're the knowledge keepers. And then they tell us what we want to know down here, or what they feel like we should know. So we're getting the leftover education that they have, and it's not always the truth. It's not always the full story. It's what they feel like we need to know. And I feel like with after school, we can change that process. Instead of it flowing downhill, we can go uphill. We can expand on what they're learning in the core day. We can dig a little deeper in the history books. We can go a little broader in science. And not only that, we're taking minority and people who may not have access to things up there with us. And so now we're broadening the river down here, and it's going to be like all the same at some point. And it's not starting at the top. Because when you talk about extended learning, most of it happens in Title I schools. So I think if I say where I see it is going, maybe that's just, and as a woman of color, that's what I would love to see it going. Just giving people who's getting trinkles of education, trinkles of the truth, trinkles of history, a chance to say, hey, you know what? I can go to this museum in Washington, D.C. I can get out of my neighborhood and kind of see like, oh, this is not just it. I can, go into a lab, I can see someone of color in a lab coat working on God knows what. It's not so narrow down here anymore.
You just touched on something that I've always thought about as well, is that modeling, and how important that modeling is. Do you see, even in your own high school experience, do you see people of color that are role models in the core day? How does that look like in expanded learning to you? Do you see a difference in just the access to those that could be models or access points, like you were saying, field trips or things, or going out to labs and stuff?
Do I see it happening, or did I see it happening when I was in school?
Just how do you see it as a whole, like from your time in school to now? And do you think that's important? Like, I don't know, what are your perceptions or what are your thoughts on just that piece of it?
Okay, I'll start back when I was in school. Things that we did after school were a different representation of what we've seen in school. Your coaches may have been minority, come from a minority background, or if you were everything maybe but band. I can say that it was someone of color. In the core day, you didn't see that. I don't remember ever having a teacher of color, especially a woman. And now, if I look at it now, I still feel like now it's all the same. I don't see it represented in the core day, and I don't see it represented in the extended day. One thing I tried to do, even with my sports side of it, we have a lot of Asian kids who are participated in sports, a lot, majority. And I was like, well, I wanted to find someone who they can represent. I had brought in two different coaches that they worked with throughout the summer, and I let them connect to the coach that they wanted to connect to. I didn't pick one for them. I let them come to a couple of games. We had a couple of games during the summer, and I was like, who you guys think? And they loved one guy, but to me, they seen themselves. The other guy ended up coaching the JV team, but it was kind of like, if I would have picked, I would have never heard their needs. They would have been underrepresented like they've always have been. But no, there is no difference right now in core day and in extended learning. And it makes me kind of sad. We have a club called Ethnic Studies. And I just always refuse to go because, I feel like you have a teacher that's running ethnic studies that doesn't represent with who's in there. And I'm just like, where's the relatability? What I mean? Where is, what's going on? And then now you have students teaching themselves. They have no guidance, no wisdom. The teacher can't, all they can do is have this whole, I feel bad for you. And I'm so sorry that happened. And, I'll be more cautious. And, what I mean? And who wants to be patted on the head the whole time, So no, there is not a difference. I've probably seen more representation when I was younger than I do now.
Do you feel like we've gone backward in time then? Like even as a whole, not just looking at your particular school, but looking at the other schools that you might be coming in contact with?
I think that there's so much on people's plates. I don't think they have time to dig in. I think that it's not like people don't want to come in and start a Metro or a BSU or really get deep and personal with these kids. I think the time, I watch and I really pay attention to the time. And I was like, well, man, you make time for what means something to you, And so I'm thinking it goes back to that first block of how do I make this meaningful enough for them to have time and want to commit and dig deeper into what's going on. I don't want to absolutely say that we're going backwards or no one cares or no one wants to do it. I literally think that it's such a stretch of a whole bunch of different things that are roadblocks that are hard to navigate, that people don't have time to just sit down and do that. I think that with the extended learning, we have to look at trying to remove some of those roadblocks as a whole so that advisors can concentrate on getting, this time in with their kids. I think there's a lot of roadblocks for advisors too.
So my last question for you, Shameka. I know you have the most beautiful son whose name is Aiden. So if he hears this, Aiden, I love and care about you so much. But you have Aiden, And he is now he's going into, please don't say third grade.
Fourth grade.
Oh, geez. I've lost a year.
Yes.
I've lost a year. So going back to Gabby's question, Shameka, if the sky's the limit and you have the magic wand and you can do anything that you want to, and you're thinking about Aiden, what does school look like these next few years? And what does it look like for him when he's in high school?
To be honest, I'm not at a point where I feel like the sky's the limit. It doesn't feel like I can dream that big. It seems like for me, it's a day by day, what's next type process. And even for him, when I think about him in school, and I really wanted him to, he's around women all the time, and I really wanted him to have men teachers and, these role models. And it was still difficult. I feel like he's still struggling to fit in, to understand, to be heard. He doesn't feel like he's heard, and it's constantly a fight and a battle. And I feel like I can never let my guard down enough to dream. I feel like I have to keep fighting these battles, which sucks for him because he needs to dream. He needs to whatever. But I have to stay focused in the moment because I got to see what these teachers are doing. I got to, make sure that, I don't want to really go into instances that happen. But it was like few things that happened. I had to like really question and really get in there. And I feel like I cannot take my eye off of him being hurt or broken because I'm too busy dreaming. So no, I'm sorry. I can't really answer that question. And maybe it's just right now. Maybe it's just a right now thing. But right now I'm kind of like locked in on his own identity. With everything going on, his biggest question is, why does people hate me because I'm Black? And so if he's focused on that, I have to get him to, for one, look inside and then project that outwards. You know what I mean? And that's still a process. So that's where we kind of are. So I guess if I say in 10 years, I would hope that he has none of these clamps on his life, none of these little mind things that he has to think about. He doesn't think about being Black. He doesn't have to think about being the only minority in his classroom. He doesn't have to think about being typecast into a career or just a sport, or, just take the clamps off and let him figure it out and be okay, have the liberty to be okay to do what he wants.
We appreciate your authenticity because I'm sure some people might have been listening and then thought, oh, she didn't give the typical Pollyanna response that it's all going to be fine and everything is all roses. And so I think we're at that point of we are wanting to have real conversations, and we hope that people are ready to hear them and listen to them. And so I appreciate you being honest. That's where you are at, and that's your truth. And so I really value that, because oftentimes I think people are fake and want to just kind of give the correct, what they think other people want to hear, what might be the correct answer. And I'm also pretty sure that there's plenty of people that are going to hear your response and say, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that's feeling that way. So I really appreciate that, because that takes a sense of vulnerability to be able to say that. So I appreciate you, Shameka. You are a gift to the students you're working with. You're a gift to us in this world. And I hope I can meet you in person one day.
Yes, without a mask.
Yes, without masks one day in the near future. I hope to have that opportunity and be able to give you a hug. I'm a hugger. Lisa and I appreciate you making the time and being here and being vulnerable and giving of yourself. So please know it's a heartfelt thank you from both of us to you.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We want you back.
And now our closing thoughts.
Shameka essentially dropped the mic for me and checked me on my own privilege right there, because it really made me think, like, dreaming and the act of creativity, the act of thinking, outside 10 years, 5 years, that's a privilege.
Mm-hmm. I was not expecting that to be her answer, truthfully. So I was humbled also by the response of, oh, wow. And just the reality, right, that she lives in and that her son lives in, that I think a lot of people aren't considering, for sure.
No. Just so much to unpack there, Gabby. Like, so what are some of your thoughts about what she was sharing, with her life, her trajectory, where she is now?
When she was going through kind of where she thought she was going to be, and then it went in a different direction, and then she would take another right turn and then a left. I kept picturing this roadway with a lot of curves and like a U-turn and then going back. That's why I made that comment of success is not this linear path. And sometimes people think, oh, you didn't go to college right away after high school, and then you didn't get married, and then you didn't have kids. And it's almost like if you don't do it in this specific order, you're doing it wrong. But who determines what the order is in, or what's right and what's wrong, right? It's just, I think, these standards that we often have. So when I was hearing her, that was a takeaway of, she is exactly where she was meant to be at this time. And if she hadn't had those U-turns in different directions that she wasn't expecting to have, she wouldn't be here. Right. And so, like she said, these unfortunate but fortunate events. And so I was glad to hear from her that she could then have that reflective perspective to then realize the connection, and that, you bring all that with you. That journey is, you don't get to just unpack it when you're working with kids or going to work.
Right.
It's who you are. It is with you at all times. So that's something that stood out for me.
No, I think every day she, her journey does impact how she looks at young people, and just having the ability to see her transformation, as when she first started in expanded learning, and then, how she immediately was looking at her own experiences, and delving in. And I think part of it is this deconstructive process about even like high school or schooling experiences, that really struck me, because as she was mentioning, her sister was first gen. Her sister's actually a doctor, and she comes from this really brilliant family of women, but yet something in school, and you asked her about it, like something at school made her uninterested. She had all the potential there. And it wasn't, and we heard this with Michael, it wasn't until somebody made her think about going to college. And in fact, here she has this obstacle where, as she's going to start on that trajectory, and I use that term lightly, because for her, it was not an obstacle. She had a child. She was a single mom through college and got through as a single mom on her own.
Yeah, she's a pretty resilient woman. And you're right. I was also surprised when she said, well, I was in these activities. And so I thought, oh, see, most of us would make that assumption that this kid is engaged. They're in ASB, they're playing a sport, they're in a club. We would never have them on a radar. If you're doing well academically, you're engaged, we're thinking you're fine. But something was missing within her. And so that I really loved when she said that sense of purpose. And I thought, oof, that's to not have a sense of purpose in life, as many of our young people, they're young, they're trying to navigate and figure it out. Maybe that's still developing. To not have that is a void. And so I could see for her to think, yeah, I'm going through these motions, but I'm not really connected. It's not meaningful in any way. And so that was surprising to me, because she was engaged, but not necessarily with a deeper purpose. And it seems like now she has found that purpose of again, it's all part of that journey. And for her, why she is passionate about serving students with intention, because maybe that was not present for her clearly in her adolescence and teen years. She didn't have that. So it's nice. It was nice to hear and spend some time with her. And I appreciate you inviting her to be part of the podcast. I like hearing from different people that have different stories, different journeys. That's always intriguing to me. So I hope that our listeners really reflect on what she shared, and how maybe they can interact with students in a more intentional way to help them build their sense of purpose. For me, was a really big takeaway that I hope some of our listeners can also take away.
Yes. Final thought is, if you are in this expanded learning or extending the learning, if you're in that realm, what she's kind of saying and laying down the gauntlet is, this is the space to have the relationships, have the creativity, kind of get out of your box as a core day teacher. Mm-hmm. And that, the kids are asking for that, really. Like, that's where they're going to these spaces. Like she said, I can't get him out of my office. Mm-hmm. It's in these spaces where they look unique from what she was saying. Like you said, all of the engaged experiences that she had. My question, maybe this is our final thought, is why was that different? Why were, that by all intents and purposes, those were experiences that she had in high school. But these experiences that she painted the picture of, totally different. Mm-hmm. They're engaged, but it's like engagement 2.0. So
engagement maybe
what
with
is that?
Meaning, right? Maybe it's the engagement with meaning, that when you bring that level, that deeper level of truly connecting and caring, and it's meaningful, you build a sense of family. I've heard you actually use that term quite a bit when you talk about your assets coordinators, our high school based programs, that say it's their sense of family that even students will tell you, that's what I get from it. When a student describes a school-based interaction as family, to me, that's the best compliment that any school or teacher could really get, is they just consider you now family, because you give them that sense of love, security, safety, stability. And that to me is the ultimate. And so I feel like that's what she's really doing with her students, is that's the difference from what she got to what she's giving today, is that she gives them that sense of true meaning and love that maybe she wasn't, unfortunately, exposed to in her experiences, but she's able to do that. That's how I interpret that, really, to mean the difference is it's that meaningful response and that engagement. And truly, it's from a place of love.
Absolutely.
That's all for now on Two Counselors and a Mic. I'm Gabby.
And I'm Lisa. Thanks for listening.